Okay, so it was asked on one of the Blender, Lightwave Blender uh, threads someplace on the Blender Artists website. Is there a chronosculpt for Blender? And chronosculpt stands for time, of course, time sculpt, like sculpting over time. So it's good for dynamics. This is a Lightwave new tech product. And as far as I know, it's no longer in development. I think it's still on version 1. So buy it at your own risk. It's available. I believe you can still buy it. But basically, what it does is gives you a timeline. I can't see any of the videos here, but if you can see down here, it gives you a timeline, and you can sculpt over time. So you can kind of create a keyframe as you're sculpting for each frame as you go along. I've used it. I'm not going to say I was that impressed with it. I think there was a lot of features that it needed. Um, it was interesting, but I think the alternate solution in Blender, I think even gives you a little more control, and it also uses already existing Blender tools. So that's another plus. It might be slightly more clunky than doing it this way, but once you get used to it, it's fairly intuitive and it works quickly. So let's get right into it. So, how is this going to be possible? So, the first thing is New Tech has a old format called MDD, which stands for Motion Designer Document. You can find that here. It's Motion Designer Document, and that's what it stands for. Okay, so there we go. Lightwave 3D Motion Designer Document, which was an old their old dynamic system. They revamped their dynamic system right after that, but they kept this format for saving documents, and it's used by a few other programs. Lightwave still has an importer exporter for it, and Point Oven, for those of you familiar with that, also can read and write Motion Designer document files. So Blender has it. There's an add-on for it to import and export MDD, and let's get into how that works and why that plays a part in this. Okay, so I'll start with the problem file. So in this case, I have a character where the cloth is going out of sync with the body, and that is simply because this is a file where the animator had added some more keyframes to the bones of the body after we had already simulated the cloth, so we hadn't updated that yet. But I have it here, and it's a good example for us to play around with the solution. Okay, so so what's going to happen is in this case, I don't have dynamics on this object. There's no dynamics on it at all here, right? So what we did was we had simulated this in Marvelous Designer, so we brought it in as an Olympic file, and there's this mesh sequence cache reader. And so that's in the deformer stack. And interesting thing about deformers, you can add things like subdivision and solidify on top of it. I don't even think the solidify one is being shown here. There we go. If we add the solidify on there, you can see how it's got some more solid cloth there instead of just being one-sided. All right, so I'm going to turn that off though, because we don't really need that. All right. So what happens is with MDD format, it's a different kind of cache format. So basically, in my case, I'm just going to go ahead and export it again from this file with the Alembic on this mesh, and I'm going to go here and oh yeah. Before you do that, you got to make sure in preferences you have MDD turned on, and you'll find it here. Import export, make sure that's turned on, right? You can search for it. All right, so if that's turned on, you'll be able to go export lightwave point cache, which is .mdd, like that. There's not a whole lot to the settings for this, and you can save it wherever you want, and then that will give you that that cache file. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind, and one of them is for the transforms on the object. make sure there's no scale on it. Like in this case, I have a 0.01 scale on it, which shouldn't be there. And that's an issue with, we didn't do that properly when we imported the limbic on this file. So that shouldn't be there. It'll create a small problem, but it's easily fixable. All right, and there shouldn't be any transforms on it. But if there is, for example, if you pulled an object all the way up in the sky and dropped it over a table or whatever, you would have some transforms on it. But after you import the cache file, you're going to want to put those transforms back to 0. All right, and the scale should be at 1. All right, otherwise it's going to look funny. So, right, so let's jump to, it takes a long time to export, so I won't do it right here. So let's jump to the one where I already exported and imported the MDD format, and I also, after I exported, I deleted this modifier, so that's no longer operating on the cloth. So we'll look at that one here. I believe that is going to be this one. Yeah. Okay. So this file now, there's no longer the modifier there, and I look down here in the shape keys, and what happens when you go to File? So what happens is basically, so it's going to be back to the beginning here like this, and this is all in the center, no transforms on it. You can see I already keyframed something here. I'll explain that in a second. So basically, what you do is go File, Import. After you've exported and deleted the modifier, right? Now you go back and File, Import MDD. So that'll be down here, right? And then go and find the file and import it. Okay? And cancel, because that takes a while on a long animation like this. So I've already got that in there now. And what it does when you do the MDD format on import, it does an interesting thing. It creates a shape key for every frame, and with a key value on, like it automatically turns, frame 1 on, and then on frame 2, frame 1 is off, and on and on and off like that. It goes all the way down, for the entire animation, all the way to the end. Right. So now that it's actually stored as shape keys, that allows us to keep our modifiers on there if we want. It also lets us edit the mesh at the mesh level, and still have it be on top of all of the other shape keys. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to start creating shape keys at the very bottom of this stack, which will then set to relative to basis, will then affect the cloth, and all these shape keys will still be active, and you will basically be doing a correction, interactive correction with the sculpt tool. So the way that works is you select the mesh. Before I do that, let's talk about what happened with the scale here. So you see the scale. When it's at 0, it's at the scale that the dress was at already. But when I go to 1, go to frame 1. So in frame 1, I had to put a keyframe to make it go to a scale of 1. Otherwise, if it's like this, the dress disappears because it's down in there somewhere, all the way down there, 100 times too small. Right, so I got a keyframe on there. I'll just pop it back. So that was simple to fix for now. Because as soon as the simulation starts, it's going to pop down to that scale, and so I make it a keyframe to compensate for that. And at frame 1, it goes to a scale of 1. So that should have been that way to begin with. So that's a good thing to just make a note of. But it's not a deal killer, so we're going to move on. All right. So what happens is we get all these shape keys populated, and then we're ready to do more shape keys. So I'm going to go to the next one and show how that works. So here we go, and I'm in sculpt mode now. All right, so let's look at the interface a little bit. So what you see here is I added these correction shape keys, and all these are shape keys that I added all the way to the bottom here, and then I left them at default, which is relative to basis, right? And so in the sculpt mode, I can sculpt on top of the dress to make these corrections. All right, so the one drawback is you need a new track for each correction. But you'll find that normally with cloth corrections, you're just fixing a few things here and there. If you're fixing a lot more stuff, then maybe you need to go back and fix your cloth simulation rather than trying to just fix everything in this method. But this method is, you could keep going easily to a dozen different fixes if you wanted, and I don't think there would be any real issue. So what's happening is, as we go through the dress here, there's places where, not that one, but other places where so let's look at this first one. So that one right there. So on that keyframe right there, see I have it set to a value of, for this one, hang on a second, this one is 1. Yeah, so that should be a value of 1 right there. So if I set it to 0, you'll see this is the part where the dress is pushing through, because what happened was, as I mentioned, there was a discrepancy between the animation and the cloth simulation. And it was easy enough to fix, and also good to illustrate this technique. So let's bump that back so we get the keyframe back. And so a similar thing happened on other frames. So as you can see, what I did here was I have the keyframe where it's off. So it's at 0. Look down here, right? You see the keyframes on this correction. And then it's on. And then I animate it off again. So if you were to look at the the shape, the curves, you'd find a nice curve, and you could edit those curves if you really needed to. In this case, it seems to work pretty good just with straight keyframes without worrying too much about the curves. Although you could get into that if needed. All right, so so then there's this one here, and on this one, the second, I believe this is the second one. Yes. Nope, that's still correction number 1. No, that's correction 2. Yep, got it. All right, correction 2. Here we go. So let's put that to 0. And this was another spot where it had moved all the way forward like this. And so I just sculpted it back and tweaked it back, and then it corrects itself like that. And then I turn it off again as the character is moving. So now it has no effect. And then the next one is correction number 3. Same thing. If I go to 1 here, where it's at 1 on number 3, and go to 0, you can see that problem. It's a whole different problem on that keyframe. And in this case, the cloth's moving pretty fast, so these problems come and go fairly quickly, right? And so I keyframe it on and off. And then finally, the last one was this little correction here. And let's go to the keyframe where that one was on. And so let's see what happened here. There we go. Yeah, so that's on right there. So if I go to 0, you can see it was just slightly intersecting right there. So pop that back. All right, so now let's just take this file, and I'll show you how to set up the next little correction, right? So let's look for that part where the leg goes through, somewhere around in here. Let's see where that is. We can find that again, sorry. So I think it was at the beginning, so let's go back. Sorry for the delay. There we go. That's good enough. So you can see that's a hot mess in there with all that stuff. colliding. From the camera, we may not even see any of that, but for that part that we do see, definitely want to fix it there. So that's a good one. So right here, you can clearly see the leg is penetrating completely the cloth, and it shouldn't be. Again, probably the same problem. This is the wrong animation for that cloth. But so let's fix this. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add I'm already in sculpt mode, if you can see up here. So you can be in sculpt mode, it's fine. And I'm going to add another keyframe, another shape key, and then going to name that. Here we go. Name that shape correction 5, and then I set the value to 1, and now I can sculpt on it. So I'm using the grab tool here. You could use any of these tools, smooth, whatever, any sculpt tools that you want to use, you can use to do this. So when we're in this mode, when we're in the sculpt mode, it's actually sculpting back to the mesh and creating a shape key, right? When you have this set to 1, right? So that's kind of nice. So in this case, I'm going to make it bigger. I'm just going to drag all of this up there and get it out of the way. So now it's no longer penetrating, right? So it's fairly simple, and we'll leave it like that for now. So now I'm going to go ahead and create a keyframe right here. Right click, insert keyframe. That'll also help me kind of mark that spot that I'm trying to fix, right? So for correction 5. Now, of course, I don't want that all the way down at the beginning. It may or may not show in this case, but you normally wouldn't want it any place before that. So now you just want to simply create a keyframe to turn it off, right? So here it is in its extreme position of penetration, and we're going to cut it back a little bit, and I'm okay with that for now because I probably won't even see that on the camera. I'm just going to say that's okay for at least this demonstration. Bring it up a little bit. Yeah, that's about right. That's a keyframe behind. So on this keyframe, I'm going to go to 0. Dress starts to come through again, and insert keyframe. So what I could do is just simply grab this keyframe and drag it back a little bit, so that it kind of goes more gradual from about right there. So even though I'm not worried about it, that earlier part of it, because of where it is in relation to where the camera is, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. And for this demonstration, it works fine. So now you can see the dress is pushing out there, right? It's pushing out just a little bit. So what I need to do now is turn it off. So let's go back to where I had it on. Get this down here more. There we go. So I have it on here, right? And then as we go over here, we don't want it to keep going out more. We want it to be off. So I'll just go 0, create a keyframe. So now it'll be off. Right, so this is 1. It's pushing out a little bit like that, see? And then back to the keyframe of 0. And you can just keep going like that through the whole thing. If you find something else you want to fix, you can fix that. And hopefully there won't be too many things. In this case, we just went ahead and resimulated the cloth. I didn't bother fixing it. But I thought this would be a great way to illustrate how to fix some of those issues. And sometimes you get penetration issues with cloth. It just happens. It's not perfect all the time. Marvelous Designer is pretty good, though, at not creating any of those really bad issues, if you know how to do it right. Anywho, so that's the process. Once you've done that, you've got it stored as shape keys. It's non-destructive. You can delete those. You can go back in and fix them and update them. And it's fairly quick. It took me about 15 minutes to correct all those little problems. and it's all interactive with the sculpt brush with all the sculpt tools available. And there you go. There's chronosculpt for Blender.